In the summer of 1993, Minneapolis was alive with sound. The hum of cars on wet pavement, the echo of laughter from downtown bars, the music drifting from windows of apartment buildings that never seemed to sleep. But in one of those apartments, behind a faded brown door on Pillsbury Avenue South, something terrible happened. That night, a young woman named Jeanie Childs lost her life in a way so brutal, so senseless, that her story would haunt the city for decades. Jeanie was 26 years old. She had grown up in Minnesota, a bright, funny, deeply empathetic woman who loved to talk to people and cared fiercely about her friends. But like many who struggled to find their footing in the early 90s, Jeanie's life wasn't easy. She worked in downtown Minneapolis, sometimes as a waitress, sometimes taking odd jobs. Those who knew her said she had a big heart, someone who'd give away her last few dollars if a friend needed it. She was a dreamer, even when her own dreams felt far away. On a warm night in June 1993, Jeanie went home to her small apartment in the Whittier neighborhood, a modest brick building tucked into a part of town where people came and went quickly, where neighbors often nodded but didn't always know each other's names. Her apartment was her space, her little refuge. The next morning, that quiet refuge would become the center of one of Minnesota's most haunting unsolved murders. When Jeanie didn't answer her phone or show up for plans the next day, a friend grew worried. By early evening, someone went to check on her. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were still on. What they found was horrifying. Jeanie had been brutally attacked, beaten, stabbed, and left in her bedroom. The scene showed signs of a struggle. She had fought hard. It was immediately clear that she had known her killer, or at least trusted them enough to let them inside. The Minneapolis Police Department launched an investigation right away. They combed through the apartment, collecting evidence, fingerprints, fibers, and, crucially, DNA. But this was 1993. DNA testing existed, but it was slow, expensive, and far from perfect. Detectives could only store the evidence and hope that someday technology would catch up. Weeks went by, then months. Leads dried up. Witnesses disappeared. Jeanie's friends grieved. Her family begged for justice, but the case went cold. For 26 years, Jeanie's name faded from the headlines. The world moved on. The city grew and changed. Her story became just another file in a long cabinet of cold cases, except for the people who loved her. For them, time never dulled the wound, but sometimes justice waits in silence until someone comes along who refuses to forget. In 2019, advances in forensic genealogy, the same revolutionary technique that caught the Golden State Killer, began to change everything. Across the country, investigators were reopening old cases, running old DNA samples through new databases, building family trees, connecting dots that had been invisible for decades. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension decided to take another look at Jeanie Childs' murder. They still had the killer's DNA, meticulously preserved for over 2 decades. Using new technology, they uploaded it to a public genealogy site. Weeks later, a genetic match appeared. Through painstaking family tree analysis, genealogists narrowed it down to one man, Jerry Westrom, a husband, a father, a businessman living a quiet suburban life just outside Minneapolis. He was in his 50s now, successful, ordinary, and seemingly harmless. No one in his family had any idea that his DNA might hold the key to a 26-year-old murder. Investigators began surveillance. They followed Westrom for days, waiting for him to discard something with his DNA on it. Then, one afternoon, at a hockey game, he did exactly what they needed. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and tossed it into a trash can. When police recovered that napkin and tested it, the results were undeniable. The DNA on the napkin matched the DNA found at the 1993 murder scene. When confronted, Westrom initially denied everything. He said he didn't know anyone named Jeanie Childs. He had no idea what investigators were talking about. But as the evidence piled up, his denials fell apart. In 2023, 30 years after Jeannie's death, the case finally went to trial. Forensic experts laid out the science, showing how the DNA connected Westrom to the scene, how it had survived time, how every test confirmed it. The prosecution argued that Westrom had been living a double life, hiding behind the facade of an ordinary man while carrying the weight of a brutal secret. The defense tried to sow doubt. They questioned the methods, the chain of custody, the new science, but the truth was too strong to ignore. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read, those who had waited nearly 3 decades for justice finally exhaled. For Jeannie's family and friends, it wasn't triumph. It was closure, quiet and heavy. The kind that comes when the truth finally steps out of the dark. For investigators, the case was a reminder of how far forensic science had come. The DNA that couldn't speak in 1993 had finally found its voice in 2019. What had once been a silent trace had become the storyteller, the final witness. For the public, Jeannie's case became a symbol. It was featured in documentaries and podcasts, discussed on YouTube and true crime channels, watched by millions who couldn't believe how a single thread of DNA could bridge a 26-year gap. It became one of those stories that reminded people that justice doesn't always fade. Sometimes it just waits for technology to catch up. But beyond the science and the headlines, it was still about Jeannie. She was more than a case file, more than a mystery solved by a lab report. She was a person, young, vibrant, flawed, human. She had dreams that never got to unfold. And for 26 years, her absence rippled through the lives of those who loved her. In interviews after the trial, her friends said they finally felt like they could breathe again, that her name could now be spoken with peace instead of pain. That somewhere, maybe, Jeannie knew the truth had come to light. Sometimes, justice is not a loud thing. It's not flashing lights or gavel strikes. Sometimes, it's quiet. It's a cold file being opened again after decades. It's a strand of DNA that refuses to be forgotten. It's the steady voice of a mother or a friend who never stopped asking questions. And when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't erase the pain, but it gives it purpose. Today, the apartment where Jeannie lived is still standing. The neighborhood looks different now, brighter, busier, full of life. People walk past that building every day without knowing what happened there, without realizing how much history those walls have seen. But for those who remember, it's sacred ground. Because in that apartment, in 1993, a life was stolen. And in 2019, through persistence, science, and human will, the truth was finally reclaimed. Jeannie's story, once buried beneath years of silence, became a reminder that even in the darkest corners of time, justice still burns quietly, waiting for the right moment to rise again.